अरुण जी का भाषण कब है? इसके बाद है तुरंत कि किसी और, इसके बाद एक और सेशन है?
दो सेशन होंगे इसके बाद। एक तो माननीय अरुण कुमार जी का 7 बजे से है, उसके पहले एक सिविलाइजेशन आइकॉन्स पे है 4 बजे से।
वो
फिर
कौन?
सिविलाइजेशन आइकॉन में अभिनव खरे मॉडरेट कर रहे हैं,
अच्छा।
और उसमें हिंडोल सेन गुप्ता,
जी।
कुणाल तिलक और जिगर नामदार, ये
अच्छा।
लोग हैं। और फिर दूसरा उसके बाद है अपना सिनेमा और आर्ट इन न्यू इंडिया, तो विवेक अग्निहोत्री और मनीष मुंद्रा उसमें रहेंगे,
ओके।
दो लोग जी।
अमीश को नहीं लिया इस बार?
अमीश का एंगेजमेंट था कुछ और काम का, उनका मैसेज आया था, तो उन्होंने बोला कि वो बाद में साथ में करेंगे कोई सेशन, तो देखते हैं।
चलो, सिचुएशन में अभी वर्चुअल लिट फेस्टिवल हो गया। लेट्स होप नेक्स्ट ईयर यू कैन हैव अ प्रॉपर फिजिकल।
होपफुली।
कोरोना, चलो, आई थिंक
या एवरीवन ज्वाइंड, so I think all panelists have joined. Aditya bhai, Priyanka, can you hear us? Yeah, great. So आज खजुराहो लिटरेचर फेस्टिवल के 2 दिन के कार्यक्रम का ये तीसरा सेशन है, जिसमें हम बात कर रहे हैं ऑक्युपाइड एरियाज ऑफ इंडिया की अनटोल्ड स्टोरीज। एक किताब आई बहुत पहले, जिसे आलोक बंसल जी, कैप्टन आलोक बंसल, जो डायरेक्टर इंडिया फाउंडेशन है, उन्होंने और निधि बहुगुणा जी ने लिखा था मिलकर, और काफी ऐसे अनछुए पहलुओं को उन्होंने टच किया है, जिसे रिमेनिंग जो भारत है वो अभी तक मुझे लगता है नहीं कि वो उसने टच किया है, और खासकर तो लिटरेचर वर्ड ने तो नहीं ही टच किया है। तो एक ऐसा प्रयास हम लोगों के द्वारा हुआ कि उसकी स्टोरी हम सामने ला सकें। आदित्य भाई हमारे साथ हैं। आदित्य भाई बहुत ही मुखर आवाज हैं कश्मीरी मुद्दों को लेकर, और ऐसी कश्मीर की स्टोरीज को इन्होंने सबके सामने लाया है, जिसे भारत का समाज अभी तक अनछुआ था, अनपढ़ा हुआ था। तो उसको लाने के लिए आदित्य भाई ने लगातार प्रयास किया है। आदित्य जी की जो पत्रकारिता रही है, उसके लगभग इर्द गिर्द रही है, और अभी वर्तमान में अंतर्राष्ट्रीय मुद्दों पे काफी काम कर रहे हैं। तो हमारे साथ 3 लोग हैं। प्रियंका यंग रिपोर्टर हैं, इस समय डिप्टी एडिटर के रूप में टीवी 9 भारतवर्ष की डिजिटल एडिशन पे कार्य कर रही हैं। और प्रियंका इसके पहले भी डिजिटल मीडिया से जुड़ी रही, और प्रियंका काफी काम लगभग भारत के अन्य क्षेत्रों से जो माइनॉरिटीज हैं उनके ऊपर काफी काम किया इन्होंने, चाहे वो मिजोरम में हो, चाहे वो मेघालय में हो, चाहे अरुणाचल प्रदेश साइड में हो, काफी काम किया है। तो प्रियंका को सेशन देते हुए कि प्रियंका प्लीज, जो ये सेशन है जिसपे आपसे मेरी चर्चा भी हुई, तो इसको आगे बढ़ाएं, और दीर्घाओं से आशा है कि आप लोग भी इस सेशन को एंजॉय करेंगे। प्रियंका।
Thank you, Satyendra ji. Actually, my Hindi is not so good, so I will conduct it in English.
Oh,
But
sure.
feel free
You
to
you can
feel
yeah,
free to
you can
answer however
choose
you
any
want.
one.
I'll try
Yeah.
my best. So bear with me here. Yeah. So thank you for all the panelists to be here as well. And let's just start by when I went to JNK. I visited Srinagar very soon after the abrogation of Article 370. And what I noticed, coming from the US, going to Srinagar for the first time in my life, it was actually a very eye-opening experience. Life was slowly but surely coming back to normal, but still heavily guarded because of security concerns. So our soldiers were guarding at that time, but people were slowly coming out. It was very much actually like a lockdown situation at that time, where the fruit markets and everything were open for about an hour or two every single day, and then people just went back home. So very, very different sort of thing to see. And I remember landing on the plane, cell phones were not working at all. So in terms of reporting and in terms of getting things done, it was quite difficult for journalists at the time. In fact, we were all staying in one hotel where there was one computer available with one sort of connection. So it was kind of unnerving. But in a way, it was very eye-opening to the situation. Now, what I found very, very interesting was the gentleman that was driving us around, me and my team around at that time. He was a native of Srinagar. And very interestingly, we just asked him, just what do you guys think, or what is your take on Article 370? And the answer that he gave us was very interesting. He said that, he was against it. So we said, how come? And we let him answer. And his response was not that he was against the Modi government or that he was, politically inclined to one side or the other. It's just that he had grown up in a Srinagar where he had never seen the development and infrastructure that probably the rest of us had. From wherever we are, whether we're from the US, whether we're from India, whether we're from anywhere else, rather overseas, or any other part of India or any of our neighboring countries. He had just not seen the same things that we did in terms of development, infrastructure, progressivism. So naturally, he was thinking that why give up our independence? Because he did not know anything outside of it. He didn't know anything better. So on that note, it was a very interesting discussion that we had, but I think our panelists can give a more fulfilling discussion on this. So I'd like to open it up to our panel. And Aditya, I know some of the work that you do. I'd like to pose the first question to you. That, I've also visited, as Satyendraji said, areas like the Middle East and, sorry, not the Middle East, northeastern India. And we've seen some of the changes from the ground up that are happening over there. I know that you do a lot of extensive work, especially with Jammu and Kashmir, in your reporting and in your journalism. So I kind of want to ask you, what was your take? What is the ground reality over there in terms of infrastructure, in terms of development, in terms of what people are thinking? Let's open it up with that. Aditya?
Thank you so much to the Khajuraho Festival and of course the organizers. And Priyanka, thank you so much. Good to see you after a very long time. Also to Professor Bansal and Nidhi ji, they've been working extensively in this particular area and other fields as well. Very interesting question, Priyanka. In fact, I just got back from Kashmir. I was there last week for a project, and I have to go again, but I don't know. The pandemic is here and, is here to stay. Last time I was in Kashmir was in August 2019, just like you mentioned, after the abrogation of Article 370. And I spent about 2 weeks there to understand what the, things really are like. And even before abrogation of 370, when, some folks from the government reached out to me for advice and asked me that, what is your take? Because one of the biggest concerns for the government at that time was that, will there be some kind of a rebellion, not just from the separatists, not just from the stone pelters, because, there was a security strategy, there was a diplomatic and a political strategy. But what about the lower brass of the J&K police or others? And I told them that, it's been a very long time that we've been in this conflict, and you need to trust your people. You need to trust and have faith and show that political intent that finally we are here to make things change, and we are not going to run through the same vicious circle time and again, and use these threats of the local politicians that have been there from the National Conference and the PDP particularly, and have faith in the J&K police, have faith in the, even the liberal Kashmiri Muslim population who will remain silent, unfortunately, because of the fear of the gun, but will understand the reality. So that's what happened finally. There wasn't even a single massive violent protest after the abrogation. So here we are. It's going to be in a few months from now, in a couple of months from now, 2 years to the abrogation. What I've found is that, yes, there have been great initiatives that have been taken. 3 lieutenant governors have changed since that time. I had the opportunity to twice interact this year with LG Manoj Sinha ji. He has a great vision and he's known for his honesty out there. And in my interactions with him, of course, I can't reveal entirely, but he understands how things are very difficult. One of the examples that I can give you here is how the radical elements have ingrained in the entire system. So while we are talking about the occupied lands, the biggest concerns for us should be the occupied mindset, the kind of radicalism that has seeped in inside Kashmir. So I tell this every time, if I'm addressing a think tank, if I'm addressing a policy initiative or even, a literature festival, that we are at a cusp of history. We have to now decide that are we going to fight terrorism or are we going to fight terrorists? We need to take a call that do we need to end terrorism or do we only need to kill terrorists? We need to decide that do we need to only, end radicalism or only radicalists? And particularly in the context of Jammu and Kashmir, the kind of corruption that has seeped in, we need to take a call that do we end only corruption or the kind of ecosystem that has been built in all across this separatism, this so-called jihad and this so-called Azadi narrative. So post 2017, Priyanka, a lot of changes have happened. The NIA investigation, multiple agency probe, the politics of J&K itself has seen quite a somersault. We see Apni Party being created. We see people like Junaid Mattu, for example, who was almost on the borderline of becoming a separatist. He then joined the National Conference, further joined the People's Conference. Today is the mayor of Srinagar and is in fact one of the first government representatives to install a national flag at the Srinagar Municipal Corporation. So we do see these changes, but I again say this, that the root cause in Kashmir, even now, the vicious circle that continues is radicalism. So while I've traveled extensively in Pulwama, in Anantnag, in Shopian, particularly in the Jamaat-e-Islami infested areas of South Kashmir, we see in mosques every Friday after the preaching, there is a half an hour, 1 hour political session in which propaganda is seeped in. The youth of that area take that preacher as a godly figure. They blindly believe in whatever he says. I had an interaction in August 2019 on the eve of Eid with one such preacher in one of the biggest terror-infested areas of Kakapura in Pulwama, where you see Jaish-e-Mohammed and Hizbul Mujahideen and others, completely taking over the area. Locals actually giving them a shelter in their own houses as well. And I told him, the preacher, that what is your, entire grievance with 370, or, why are you totally in favor of it? And he said, no, we will, ये हमारा बुनियादी हक है और हम इसको मरते दम तक लेते रहेंगे. I said, बहुत अच्छी बात है, लेकिन आप मुझे ये बताएं कि है क्या 370, आपको ऐसा क्या लगता है कि आपसे छिन गया? And he said कि भाई हमारी नौकरियां छिन जाएंगी यहाँ से. I said, बहुत बुरा होगा, लेकिन आप ये बताएं कि आपके पास नौकरियां कौन सी हैं यहाँ पर काकापुरा पुलवामा में? He said कि भाई हमारे पास सीमेंट की फैक्ट्रियां हैं और ब्रिक क्लिन्स हैं. तो आई सेड कितने हैं? ही सेड 8-10 हैं. आई सेड कितनी नौकरियां हैं उसमें? ही सेड 150-200 नौकरियां हैं. आई सेड यार, जहां पर आतंकवाद है, जैसे दिल्ली में दंगे हुए, तो क्या आप अपने बेटे को उस वक्त दिल्ली में दंगों के बीच में नौकरी करने के लिए भेजोगे? ही सेड नहीं, मैं कभी नहीं भेजूंगा. आई सेड फिर आपको कैसे लगता है कि यहाँ पर आतंकवाद है, पाकिस्तान से आतंकवाद आता है, या वायलेंस होती है, या स्टोन पेल्टिंग होती है, और दिल्ली से, बंबई से, या फिर पंजाब से, हरियाणा से, कहीं से भी कोई नौकरी लेने के लिए आ जाएगा और आपकी नौकरी छीन लेगा? So at that point he lost it completely and he said, नहीं, मुझे आपके साथ डिस्कशन करना ही नहीं है, मैं मरूंगा, मैं हार्ट का पेशेंट हूँ, मरीज हूँ, मैं मर जाऊंगा, मैं 370 के लिए अपनी जान दे दूंगा. और there's a crowd that collects at that particular moment, they start chanting slogans and I have to leave. So this is the reality. I say this to the government also, that you need to do something about radicalization, because till the time you kill 250-300 terrorists every year, it's going to be a vicious circle. You will give awards to our brave forces. Unfortunately, many of our forces will get killed in line of action, but there will be no permanent solution. So yes, 370 abrogation is a very praiseworthy step. Uh, Kudos to the Narendra Modi government for doing that. But there's a lot more that needs to be done. There needs to be a consistency as well. And also, the kind of politics that's been driven in JNK has to change. The kind of politics and narrative that we have seen running through Gupkar Road. So Gupkar Road is a very interesting road, as you would also know, Priyanka, in Kashmir, which I refer to either as the Khan market of Kashmir, or perhaps the Amrita Shergill Marg, or a similar area. So I'll tell you something interesting which many people won't know. So on one side of Gupkar Road is the Abdullahs and Muftis and others. On the other side of Gupkar Road is the intelligence agencies of India, and of course the army and other forces as well. So what we have seen, unfortunately, in Kashmir is that either the Abdullahs or the Muftis have been running the government, and only their families getting filthy rich. The kind of properties they have, not just in JNK but across India and the world, is astonishing. On the other hand, Priyanka, now there are agencies who are hand-holding politics, who have done that with PDP in the past and unfortunately are doing it again. So that needs to change as well. So yes, a little hand-holding happens everywhere across the globe, but till the time there are grassroots leaders who come up in Kashmir, who believe in the Indian constitution, in the Indian democracy, in the Indian ethos, in secularism as well, till that time, unfortunately, things won't change. So I'll stop my initial remarks here and perhaps give much more learned people opportunity to speak.
That's a very good point that you make, Aditya. And I just want to go back to that. Now, you said one of the solutions was, sort of until you sort of kill, no pun intended, but until you sort of kill this radicalization in terms of terrorism and what's going on there, people's minds are not going to change. Their ideology is never going to change, because that is anyway a long process, right? But is this the only way? Because, I had an interview with the DM of Srinagar at the time. And I think I went there. I think I just missed you, because I think I went there right around when you went there as well. He gave some very interesting points. I remember very clearly in that interview, because these were some things that even I didn't know through my research, that, Jammu and Kashmir, in terms of development and infrastructure, he was saying that, Jammu and Kashmir were the only areas outside of the ambit of the stock exchange. They only had one registered company, which was JNK Bank, I think he said. He also said that there was 18 lakh scheduled tribe population who are now, after the abrogation, able to get political reservations, rights over forest lands. Students are open to infrastructure and development as well. They were really excited. Hydropower is really important over there. So now they are open to investments over there. Can these things change people's ideologies? And I'd like to go to Alok ji, maybe to answer this. In terms of infrastructure and development, is just killing radicalization? Of course, that's important. But is that the only way? Can we see mindsets change with the influx of more infrastructure and development? Is that the way forward?
Well, Priyanka, as far as infrastructural development is concerned, let me make it one thing very clear. Jammu and Kashmir on per capita income basis is not one of the poorest states in India. So it's actually not an economic crisis. And I tend to agree, it's an ideology. It's actually the radicalization which has actually seeped into the territory, which is actually very, very important. Because now what you see, what Aditya said, I would like to take it forward, that you will find in families where the father was actually a Sufi, but his son has become a Wahhabi. In fact, a large number of clerics and large number of mosques, not only in Kashmir Valley, but also in Punch, Rajouri area, Doda area, are the ones who have actually trained in mosques, various madaris in UP and Bihar, and have come there and are actually educating people. But what I would like to move forward is that once we abrogated 370 and 35A, I personally feel it's an irrevocable step. We have actually moved forward. Now our focus is now on the occupied territories, actually, which we as Indians consider as occupied territories, which are under now the occupation of Pakistan and China, actually, which is what I have been trying to say for a long time is that just because those territories are under the occupation of Pakistan and China does not make India lose them. As long as we have them within our mental space, like the Jews would say for thousands of years next year in Jerusalem, as long as they had that feeling that we would go back. Now, the problem in India is that while J&K itself is understood very less, the knowledge about those areas which are under the occupation of Pakistan, or for that matter, under the occupation of China, is abysmally low. In fact, sometimes back, even very, very renowned journalists would often call AJK as POK or something like that. And that sort of a situation should not be happening. And that is what is very, very important. Is what we want to do is that we feel that now that reorganization of Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh has taken up, the focus of the government, the focus of the populace of this country should be on those occupied territories, which are under Pakistan's occupation, which are under China's occupation. Now, of course, we have now reorganized the territory, but before we reorganized, there was a misconception that what we called as POJK, or Pakistan occupied Jammu and Kashmir, was synonymous with what Pakistan calls as AJK, or Azad Jammu and Kashmir, which is not the case, and which we need to understand that this is not the case. Unfortunately, people did not know. People did not know that it is just about 1/8 of the territory of Jammu and Kashmir under Pakistan's occupation, which is called AJK. Where the much larger area was the Gilgit-Baltistan, where the people have been protesting against what has happened. They have a different culture. They have a unique cultural entity. Their history is very, very rich. They have been part of the Indian cultural milieu, the part of the Indian historical milieu, extremely rich territory, which has very, very unique languages. Even within Islam, the sects that exist in these areas are quite different. Now, if we actually claim, as India's always been claiming, that these territories are ours, right from the childhood, I always grew up drawing a map of India. It only took me a few years to realize that, well, while I draw this map, not everything contained within this map is part of India as of now, as far as the administrative control of India is concerned. It took me a long time to understand what these areas were. What was Gilgit? What was Baltistan? What is Mirpur? What is Muzaffarabad? What is Aksai Chin? What is Shaksgam? What is Eastern Ladakh? Now, it took a long, long time for people to understand. Now, the problem is that while we claim these areas as ours, we know nothing about them. In fact, if you go to the archives of India, you'll find such plethora of information within that, which Nidhi ji has actually uncovered. How many Indians know that right inside Tibet we had an enclave, which was part of Jammu and Kashmir, which used to pay taxes to the government of India as late as 1950. Now, people don't know that there was an Indian enclave inside Tibet called Minsar. We don't know that. What was the salience of Gilgit-Baltistan? What was the salience of Mirpur, Muzaffarabad? How this territory came to be occupied by Pakistan? I think these are the issues I think that we need to highlight. I have no doubts as far as Kashmir Valley is concerned, things will improve. We have, as Aditya ji said, we have a competent administration there. We have a very competent LG. Now our focus is towards those territories which are under the occupation of these two adversaries. And I think the people of this country ought to know what are the aspirations of people who live there. Because I remember in 2007, I had got a lot of people from that part of that Jammu and Kashmir. And some of them came and said, well, India claims that we are their citizens. And if we are their citizens, then they should provide us reservations in IIT and IIMs because we don't have educational facilities there. Pakistan treats us like a colony. So we should be provided. We have been saying from 1947 onwards that we have assembly seats for these people in the Jammu and Kashmir Assembly before the reorganization. But did we ever conduct an elections for them? Or did we ask the people from there to actually contest? Or did we allow the people who have migrated from those regions to at least contest those elections? We did not. So we have virtually for a very, very long period of time, for 7 decades, though we kept showing this territory as part of Indian map, we have really not made any endeavor to know these people and to take tangible steps to integrate this territory back with India. Because we need to understand that this territory is extremely, extremely important. When we look at it strategically, geostrategically, today, if CPAC is taking place, it is only because this territory is occupied by Pakistan. If this territory was with India, it would not have taken place. Most of the high peaks of the world, in fact, almost 75% of the 15,000 feet and above peaks are in this particular area. This has the longest glaciers outside the polar region. So it's a very, very rich area. In fact, the Gilgit manuscripts, which are considered the oldest Bhojpatra manuscripts, which were found in actually regions of Hunza. So the aim why Satyendra did talk about a book which we came out, which was actually not a very big book, just a 200-page odd book, Occupied Territories of Bharat, we came out. This was primarily to acquaint an ordinary Indian with these territories, which are not only exotic, but are an integral part of India as far as Constitution of India is concerned, as far as the legal position is concerned. And we ought to know how to go about it, because we need to know about these people. We have seen what happened in Ladakh in recent past, but how many of us do know what is the historical background of this area? What are our claims? How strong are our claims? And how strong are these boundaries which we claim as sacrosanct as far as India is concerned? So these are the factors, I think, which an ordinary Indian, today I feel, needs to be educated. I have no doubts that in Jammu and Kashmir, the die has been cast and there is no chance of it going back. So as the Home Minister said in Parliament, says now our aim is not this part of the Kashmir which is under us, which will thrive and which will prosper and which will go forward. But now our aim is to look at those territories which have been illegally occupied by hostile powers, how to get them back and how to integrate them back with India.
Alok, what you said is so simple and so difficult, which is why I'm smiling, because the concept is, it's as simple as if you're making a friend, you need to get to know them first before you call them your friend, right? And what you're talking about is super important in terms of bringing an identity to these people that the rest of India can relate with, because our education on them, our knowledge about them is so low. And that's a fact of the matter, because they've not been exposed to us, we've not been exposed to them. And especially somebody, like me, or somebody my age, or even somebody younger, I'm thinking of my nieces and nephews who really have no idea what's going on. So Nidhi ji, let me give the mic to you. And why don't we talk about this a little bit in terms of culture, in terms of identity of these people? What's the best way to go about it?
Yeah, so like today's talk, when it started, the first thing that came to my mind was, we don't lose territories once they are occupied. We lose territories if we forget them. The minute we talk about Jammu and Kashmir, we're only talking about Kashmir and Srinagar. We never talk about the occupied areas. So Captain Bansal ji has given you a brief overview. So let me just give you a brief overview. Also, people who are listening to us for the first time will have a slight idea of what the occupied territories are. Some are under Pakistan, what Pakistan calls Azad Jammu and Kashmir, right? So that area, we call it as Mirpur Muzaffarabad. So people in there, so whenever we're talking about human right violations, the only human right violations we talk about are those that we talk about the Kashmir Valley. Basically, even whenever you were discussing, you said you went to Kashmir, you saw the people there, we're talking about the Kashmir, we're talking about the human rights in Kashmir. But in Mirpur Muzaffarabad in 1947, when this area was occupied, there were tribal raids. They were aided by the Pakistani army. So we have to understand there were about 20% of the population was non-Muslim. So that population, what happened to them? It is 0% now. Non-Muslim population, since you're working on minorities, the non-Muslim population of Mirpur Muzaffarabad is 0%. So what happened to that 20% population? Thousands of girls were kidnapped. So whenever we are hearing, every day we hear, okay, some Hindu girls in Sindh have been kidnapped, converted, and they're refused and the abductors refused to return them. Same thing was happening in Mirpur, Muzaffarabad. And the lucky people who escaped from Mirpur, Muzaffarabad, they came to Jammu and they stayed in Jammu. They are called POJK refugees, Pakistan Occupied Jammu Kashmir refugees. We never hear about them. They are like they've been blackened out from the history. But till 1954 in the parliament, these issues were discussed. The issues of recoveries had started. The girls who were kidnapped and taken to protected villages, when they were recovered, so the whole village would get together and they would refuse to return the girls. In Mirpur area, about 3 girls, they were recovered, and the deputy commissioner of the police had to return the girls back to the abductors. So for some time, all these issues were creating a lot of fire in India, but slowly these issues have gone silent. And then the people who came back to Jammu and Kashmir, they were not allowed to settle in Srinagar area. They were only allowed to settle in Jammu, and they were given refugee camps in places like Gorakhpur, Punjab, away from the Kashmir Valley. These questions are never asked. My aim, we wrote this book, our main aim was to highlight what happened to these people. So when a Mirpur dam was built in Mirpur with the help of the World Bank, so the areas were inundated and the compensation has never been given to the Mirpuris who are settled in India, in the Indian part of Jammu and Kashmir, because they said that POJK is still a part of India. So we cannot give you compensation for whatever you've left behind. These questions have never been highlighted. We have never, ever, there has been a narrative of what happened to those girls. What happened to the descendants? Those girls, where are those families? Same thing when we discuss what is the territory of Ladakh. So when we discuss that, we never discuss what happened to the non-Muslims in Gilgit and Baltistan. We never discuss how the Pakistani army, they kidnapped the employees of Jammu and Kashmir government. They took them to the frontier areas. And we have lots, if you go on the National Archives, we have so many applications where fathers are asking the daughters to be located. There are applications that are stating that the daughter of a postal clerk was forcibly married by the Pakistani army, forcibly married to Pakistani army officers. We never discuss about these silent victims of Jammu and Kashmir. And even now, in Gilgit-Baltistan, now that area is under the Union Territory of Ladakh. So that area is mainly Shias. From 1998 onwards, there were lots of sectarian violence in that area with the influx of a Sunni population. From 1998 onwards, our citizens of Gilgit-Baltistan, who are Indian citizens, have been sidelined. Their human rights have been trampled upon. We never discuss it because that area has been forgotten. Whenever we discuss Jammu and Kashmir, it is only in the context of the Kashmir Valley, which is 16% of the whole area. So if we go to the National Archives, we will find that we had areas till a place, if I take the names, you'll be surprised because you would have never heard the names. It's not your fault. Even when I read the names, I could not even pronounce the names. There's an area called Tagdam Bush Pamir. Till 1947, it was a part of India. Till independence, Jawaharlal Nehru, in many letters, he mentioned that we have our borders still there. And then even in if you go to the minutes of the British Empire, when the British were giving back the Gilgit Agency and the areas back to the Jammu Kashmir King. So it is mentioned clearly that Indian border, 17-kilometer border was shared with Russia at Tagdambush Pamir. And then we have just even stopped claiming that area. We have forgotten that area, which was a part of India. Then there's an area which Captain Alok Bansal mentioned called Minsar. It is not in Jammu Kashmir proper, but the title of the Jammu Kashmir Maharaja used to be Maharaja Jammu Kashmir Tatha Tibet. So there was an area in Tibet called Minsar, which for centuries has been maintaining the Kailash Mansarovar Yatra. We have records till 1962 of tax collection from that area. Until 1962, in our Indo-China boundary talks, we were giving claims on our rights to Minsar. And it is the whole white paper has been presented in the parliament. But the tragedy is that none of us, we Indians, ourselves do not know that these territories belong to India, and they are not under the control of India as yet. So unless we know about the areas, we know about the human rights violations that our citizens are suffering and our citizens suffered, then we cannot go forward. Whenever we discuss Jammu and Kashmir, we have to bring these areas into focus as much as we do about the Kashmir Valley. This was my point. Thank you.
No, thank you for that. I think for our audience, especially, that was, and for me, that was a great information dump, actually. That was just a JNK 101 class that you gave. So thank you so much for all that insight. With that being said, let's talk a little bit about what Nidhi ji was focusing on, which was this sort of disconnect that we've had over the years. Alok ji, I want to get back to you. Aditya, I also have a question for you, but before I get to you, Alok ji, can you talk a little bit about this disconnect? Because you were talking a little bit before about culture, identity of these people. Now, we've been disconnected with these people for so long. What's the way forward in terms of bridging this gap so that even a young person, especially, right, with no sort of exposure to this topic, will get it?
Sorry, what I feel is that as of now, there is a complete ignorance. So I think we need to start right from the beginning. I think school students must be taught a basic geography of Jammu and Kashmir, especially the occupied territories, as to and a little bit of history as to how this area came under the occupation of Pakistan, in case of Pakistan, and how this part of it came under the occupation of China. And what are the historical positions? Because unlike with Pakistan, where I think the delineation is quite clear in black and white, with China, it's different shades of gray. And actually those shades of gray actually depend on history. We have no doubt that till 1954, Dr. Radhakrishnan's son, who was heading the historical division, Professor Gopal, I think so, he told Prime Minister Nehru categorically that India's claims on these territories are impeccable. And it's only after 1954 that India started claiming these territories unequivocally as far as China is concerned. And that continued. So what we need to do is, I think, first is to understand the geography. What is the geography of this particular region? Because a lot of people say that when Aksai Chin is ours, then why didn't we have our soldiers there? Why we didn't have? People don't realize that the lowest altitude in Aksai Chin, that part, is 4,300 meters, where an ordinary human being cannot survive in normal case, unless, of course, you have got acclimatized. That's that above 14,000 feet. So that's the minimum altitude, as I said. And to compound the problems in Aksai Chin, you have soda water lakes. There is actually very, very little precipitation. It's actually, and as a result, these soda water, salt water lakes, the water evaporates slowly. And then, of course, the soda ash flows around, and soda ash being alkaline, it actually does not support any vegetation or anything. So it's an extremely hostile area. In fact, when the Britishers were ruling India, the defense of this part was discussed a large number of times, that the Britishers felt this area was indefensible and nobody could come there. There was nothing to be gained. That is what the perception was. And that's why I think the inhospitable terrain of this particular area prevented India from positioning its troops or people there as far as Aksai Chin is concerned. As far as Pakistan occupied territories are concerned, I think at different stages of time, I think the Indian leadership took a different stance. Probably after 71, when we had the best option of resolving this particular issue, Mrs. Gandhi was actually led to believe that probably line of control could be the best option. And I think her advisors at that point of time probably led her. And as a result, there has been an information blackout as far as India is concerned. It's only recently that we have started talking about these territories. And that actually brings up, like Aditya said, there is a radicalization, there's a massive radicalization. This wave of radicalization is also taking place across line of control. Both in Mirpur, Muzaffarabad and Gilgit-Baltistan, the radicalization is going on. And Gilgit-Baltistan, as Nidhi brought out rightly, is a Shia majority area. And Shia also two different sects of Shias, that is Ithnai Sharia or the 12er Shias, which Iran, which is the state religion of Iran, which is of course a dominant. But Gilgit-Baltistan also has a very, very large chunk of Ismailis, the followers of His Highness Aga Khan. The Hunza Valley, which is actually the northernmost tip of India, if you actually go by our map, is actually a Ismaili territory where Aga Khan Foundation is extremely active. And despite being the most remote area of South Asia, the Human Development Index there has actually risen considerably because of the efforts of Aga Khan Foundation. So these different sects and this plurality of thought process, even within the fold of Islam, is unacceptable as far as radicals are concerned. Please understand, greater the radicalization, lesser is the tolerance for ambiguity. And as a result, there are sectarian conflicts, which she talked about, because those radicalized Wahhabi or Sunni youth are unwilling to accept any deviation, even within the fold of Islam, from their viewpoint. And similarly, in Mirpur, Muzaffarabad, we still, though all Hindus and Sikhs have been wiped off, we still have a small sprinkling of Christians and Baha'is, etc., as far as minorities are concerned. And to compound matters, now Ahmadiyyas have also been clubbed as non-Muslims, and they are also being targeted. These areas are so aesthetically beautiful, actually, that till 96-80% of the tourists going to Pakistan would visit these areas. Of course, consequently, because of various developments, now tourism into this area has actually come to a virtual grinding halt. But it was an area which had enormous attraction for tourists coming there. It also has very, very rich mineral deposits. When Maharaja of Kashmir was ruling prior to independence, we had smaller vassals of his, the subsidiary rulers who were in this particular area, and they would pay their taxes in terms of gold dust, because the rivers that actually flew through here, they had the gold dust in that, and the dust used to be distilled and filtered, and the taxes that they used to pay to the Maharaja was in the form of gold dust. In fact, some certain geological investigations talk of huge gold deposits in this particular area. There are talks of uranium deposits. There are huge new natural resources. In fact, at this point of time, when CPEC and China is moving into Pakistan in a big way, large number of hydropower plants have been planned for this area in Gilgit-Baltistan. In fact, there are huge thousands and thousands of megawatts of hydropower is planned to be generated from this. And this is actually going to inundate this territory. Now, this is another part. The dams and hydropower plants have been constructed in such a way that the inundation takes place in this territory, which is actually legally and constitutionally an integral part of India. But the benefits will be derived by Pakistan, because the electricity and the irrigation water will be supplied all downstream, which will go to the Pakistani heartland, whereas inundation of the fertile land is taking place in Gilgit-Baltistan and Mirpur, Muzaffarabad, and which are actually Indian territory. Now, I think these issues need to be raised even in media, that these are our territory, our people who are actually being victimized to benefit Pakistan. And I think once media starts doing it, and once the children are educated at a lower level, that what I feel is in the school textbooks, you could have small lessons on places like Gilgit-Baltistan or Hunza manuscript or Gilgit manuscript or Minsar or maybe Aksai-Chin, that would educate it, a basic knowledge. I'm not trying to say that they should go. And then, of course, subsequently, as they grow up, they could start studying, because then there's a lot of material to be studied and things like that. So when we talk of human rights violation, when we talk of minority rights, we must also talk about these issues with respect to these territories which are under the adverse possession of Pakistan.
Thanks, Alokji. And, you raised a very important point, which I wanted to ask Aditya about. Mentioned that, Aditya was talking a little bit about radicalization. You spoke about the importance, which I agree with, of educating children, especially at a young age, just on basics, not detailed, but just so that they have a clue, because even that at this point is not happening. And I'm sure, coming from India Foundation, you know that even adults who have been educated have a very sort of limited, I would say, ability to research things and to look things up. We get carried away by what's going on in media, what's given to us in mainstream media, especially. Aditya, I wanted to ask you, because this is something that really bugs me. I mean, when we look at these studies, these polarizing studies that come out online, especially from certain media, mainstream media, right? For example, the most recent issue I can think of that most people can relate with is using the wrong map of India, right? Where the government had to call it out that, look, strict action is going to be taken if you use the wrong map. I can't help thinking that this is something mainstream media does on purpose at times. How can you not know what is the correct map to use? It can't be a mistake each and every time. But the problem is that now all, I would say, four of us have more knowledge than most about Jammu and Kashmir. But what about the rest of the population who gets hit with this information time and time again? What are they supposed to do? What is the best way to react to this information? What's the best way to process this information to a country that is, I would say, getting increasingly polarized, or if you don't agree with that statement, getting hit with mainstream media and content like this day in, day out, and also with international leaders saying there's a loss of human rights going on there right now?
See, firstly, guilty as charged. I mean, media is responsible and media should be asked questions. I do that all the time. As a journalist, questioning the television media and particularly the left-wing media and their bias, particularly on Jammu and Kashmir. But before I enter that, there are three relevant points that I want to get into. One, Alok ji and Nidhi ji very beautifully explained, what we have been missing on the other side of the border. And just narrating my own experience, what exactly has been happening, we only know this through the words of Senge Sering or perhaps Jamil Maqsood or Shaukat Ali Kashmiri and others who have been raising this at the United Nations and different other platforms. So I've been in touch with them and they've been frustrated also because it's been a lonely battle for them as well. The Indian government has had only a lip service with regard to Pakistan occupied Jammu and Kashmir, with regard to Gilgit-Baltistan. We should have been very vociferously arguing for it. At least the narrative should have been set. But be it the Congress government, be it the BJP government, unfortunately did not bother. There was perhaps only one or two statements yearly that used to come whenever there was talk of CPEC. The Indian government used to say that, it's our territory and this cannot happen, and forget about it. So that needs to change. It has changed to a certain extent, with even the Home Minister and others speaking about it openly from the platform of the Indian Parliament. So that has to continue. Secondly, Alok ji spoke about the aspirations of the people in Pakistan occupied Jammu and Kashmir. I want to give you an example. In 2017, I was working with Republic TV as one of its editors. And I came in contact with Tanveer Ahmed, who's an activist from POK, stationed in Rawalakot. He's a British Kashmiri. And another fellow, I'm forgetting his name, he was the editor of a Urdu daily called Daily Mujdala in POK. They carried out over a period of 8 to 10 years a survey in Pakistan occupied Jammu and Kashmir to ask what were the aspirations of the people. And in the process, they met 30,000 families. And they asked them only one question. I mean, there are a series of questions, but the main question was, do you want independence or do you want to stay with Pakistan? You'd be surprised that 73% people said that we want independence from Pakistan. And this was the common people. There was no bias. Tanveer Ahmed and the editor of Daily Mujdala are not agents of India. They are stationed there. Their upbringing has been there. It was their own, initiative to conduct this poll. I carried out this news report in Republic in the mid of 2017 sometime, and immediately the ISI arrested the editor of Daily Mujdala, and the newspaper was shut down completely. Now, recently, just a few months back, Tanveer Ahmed had the audacity, I would say, the courage to in fact remove Pakistani flag from one of the main centers of Rawalakot Kotli, during one of the protests out there. And that video really went viral. So when he did that, he was immediately arrested by the ISI and the Pakistan security forces. Now, for the last 4 months, he's been arrested and he's in jail. So you can imagine if an activist, a very vocal activist at that, Tanveer Ahmed, if he is arrested, there are no basic fundamental rights given to him. Only for removing flag, he's been in jail. So you can imagine what's been happening with other people out there. There are no basic political rights. I mean, we know the story of Babajan from Gilgit and several others who've just been recently released, and for over a decade, they've been suffering torture at the hands of people. So I'm just speaking about POK. I'm not even talking about the minorities of Hindus, Sikhs, and Christians and Ahmadiyya Muslims who face this every day. I mean, every day on my WhatsApp, I get reports of a Sikh girl being kidnapped by the majority community. There's this activist journalist called Vingus, who till recently I believed was a Hindu, but I was shocked. Her name was Vingus, so somehow I believed she's a Hindu. And she said, no, I'm a Muslim, but I work with the Hindus. And she's been from Sindh exposing how the local radicals, Mia Mittu and several others, have been capturing, forcibly abducting Hindu girls out there and converting them to Islam. The courts of Pakistan, the political parties of Pakistan are hand in gloves in this entire process. So there's so much to talk about it. And unfortunately, there's so much little that the Indian media or even the Indian intelligentsia is even interested in, unfortunately. So I did my bit, I mean, earlier in Republican Times, now in CNN, to try and expose this, try and highlight these plights. But there's much more that needs to be done. So one important aspect, apart from radicalization that I mentioned, is, as Alokji and others mentioned, awareness and education. So till the time we work on that in Kashmir, things are not going to change. I mean, you look at a society over the last 30 years, there have been no Hindus that have been left. So the majority population, my friends out there, do not know what is to live with the Hindus, or for that matter, the Sikh community. What is the rich heritage? I mean, there is a lonely temple standing in Renavari in Srinagar, where I was born, and there's nobody that goes to that temple most of the year, and it's just standing there. And one day in the mid 90s, there was a holy tree of Vital Bhairava there, which was cut by the local Muslim population, and they were used to do a lot of drugs, etc. there. And suddenly, one of those people who was doing drugs died. And since then, there's a fear of that Vital Bhairava that, if you go near that temple or that near that tree that you had cut, there would be bad omen and somebody would die. So, I mean, they do not know what is to live in this kind of an assimilation as we do in the rest of India. So the kind of propaganda that's been running, the kind of ecosystem, and I like this each time since 2017, there has been action. But for last 3 decades, there's been an ecosystem that's been running in Kashmir. Now, what's this ecosystem? This ecosystem isn't just the separatists and the, NC and PDP politicians. It's also the media out there. The kind of conflict journalism that they have done over the years on the dead bodies of innocent Kashmiris who have died, innocent Kashmiri Muslim policemen even. I mean, you know the case of Muhammad Ayub Pandit, who was lynched outside the Jama Masjid in Navhata just a few years back, and not a single protest all across India, the Not In My Name gang, did not line up or protest at all. So was he a lesser Muslim? Was he a lesser Indian that he did not deserve any kind of a protest or a voice from common Indians? So that's what we need to highlight as well. The bravery, the sacrifice of the Kashmiri Muslim policemen or people in the armed forces who go against the tide, who whenever they go on Eid holidays with their families are killed just because they are Muslims in Kashmir and have joined India in this entire battle. So unfortunately, there's much more that the government of India needs to do. But there is a great amount of change in Kashmir. I mean, of course, there's a threat on my life and in Kashmir whenever I go there, but I do see a change. There is an airy calm, and of course, encounters continue. There are, some attacks that also continue. But one thing that I've told repeatedly is that what you need to keep in mind in Kashmir is that the writ of the state, the might of the state, was shown on 5th August 2019 when the abrogation happened, and that needs to continue. I mean, we have been looking at these threats from NCPDP and separatists over the years and trying to cultivate them, and our agencies have been paying them and helping them out in this entire process. That needs to change to a great extent. I mean, why not have Indian flags on all the government buildings as is being done right now? If you're in India, you need to believe in Indian constitution and go by the Indian flag. But at the same time, one of the biggest failures, and I have to be a devil's advocate, if I don't bring out the failures, then what is my job? Is messaging. I mean, the messaging and the communication of the government on Jammu and Kashmir, unfortunately, has failed to a great extent. The kind of attacks that we face from the Western media, the New York Times, Al Jazeera, BBC, and others, was massive and humongous after abrogation of 370. Now, there can be only two things that one can do. One, like China, you completely ignore it. I mean, there's only the state media, and you, of course, cannot go the other way. Or you have a plan in place, just like you had a security and a diplomatic and a political plan, a messaging plan, which we slowly and smoothly have realized, but there's much more that needs to be done. I mean, I give another example of Balakot. When Balakot happened, I mean, it was one of the biggest steps that India had taken, a paradigm shift in many, many, many years. But within hours, Abhinandan was captured and Asif Kapoor did that press conference and everything changed. I'm going a little off topic because this concerns messaging and communication of the government. So the government needs to understand that messaging, your intra-ministry messaging and the messaging out in public also at the international and the national forum is of abundant concern right now, because we are living at a time when it's not just battles on the field, it's about hybrid warfare, it's about information warfare, and every minute things changed in the time of Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. So there's much more that needs to be done, but I think we're on the right path, slowly but steadily heading towards a positive and a Naya Kashmir, as we say.
Thanks, Aditya. And you raised some really, really good points. I'm glad that you played devil's advocate, because there are so many media professionals that don't do that. They just care more about the hits and the likes, and it's just becoming an information planet right now. So that's all that's mattering. But we have to take a step back, I think, as media professionals as well. We're talking about what's the way forward for everyone else, but it's so important for media professionals to also take that step and get in tune with trying to solve the problem, because communication is as important, as you said, as diplomacy, as strategy, and as anything else, especially in today's world. So with that being said, I think we just have a few minutes before I have to wrap up this session. What I really want to do is go to each and every one of you, maybe 2 minutes each, just either way forward, or if there's anything that I haven't asked you that you'd like to raise, I'll give you 2 minutes each. Why don't we start with Nidhi ji?
Can't, you are mute.
Nidhi, can you hear us?
Yeah. Okay. So I just wanted to tell you, in Gilgit-Baltistan, in the area of Baltistan, the swastik, which is revered by Hindus, is equally revered by the Shia Muslims there. And we'll find the swastik in the mosques. We'll find the swastik on the collar of the yaks. So that is one point. And the other little information I want to give you, that in the POK, Azad Jammu Kashmir, we have a Sharda Peeth, ruins of an ancient Shakti Peeth, which had a university, which was as great a university as Nalanda and Takshila in Sharda Peeth. And the Shankaracharya from Kerala, he had gone to Sharda Peeth and he had become the Shankaracharya in Sharda Peeth. So I just wanted to put out these 2 points about the culture of that area. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Nidhi ji. Captain Alok Bansal, over to you. Way forward, or anything that I haven't asked you that you'd like to raise? 2 minutes.
See, as I said, the way forward, as Aditya said, we have to actually curtail radicalization. I've always had a viewpoint that in societies that lack pluralism, people become radicalized because they're exposed to only one lifestyle, one way of living, and that actually leads them to a sort of a perception where they believe that any deviation from the perceived lifestyle is a problem. And that radicalization can be curbed by exposing people to a pluralistic society. And it is in that context that it is essential that the pluralistic society that existed in Jammu and Kashmir before the exodus of the Kashmiri Pandits needs to be recreated. I think we need to create infrastructure that facilitates. But as I said, what is even more important is that Jammu and Kashmir is not only Kashmir Valley. That fact needs to be understood. And I think, as I said, the occupied territories, which is a very, very significant chunk of Indian territory, we need to acquaint our citizens about this particular territory, that this is our territory, what is the geography of this place, what is the people, and as Nidhi brought out, the cultural homogeneity with the rest of India. When we actually go back into history, you'll find that Samrat Lalitaditya had his empire, which went all the way up to Central Asia and down below to Ujjain. He had defeated the king of Ujjaini, the Yashovarman. So his empire extended. Now this glorious historical period of Jammu and Kashmir, when Kashmir's empire actually extended all the way from Central Asia to southern India, has actually been forgotten. And as a result, what has happened is that the Pakistani media of late has been trying to churn out a propaganda that Jammu and Kashmir was never a part of India. In fact, they say historically itself. And even within Jammu and Kashmir, now there is a very serious attempt by Pakistanis to say that Gilgit-Baltistan was never a part of Jammu and Kashmir. In fact, now they are trying to make Gilgit-Baltistan out of Jammu and Kashmir and create it as a fifth province of Pakistan. Now, this is actually a historical myth. The fact is that Ashoka's empire actually extended all the way up to Gilgit. The city of Gilgit is actually recognized by a huge Lord Buddha's sculpture, which is actually carved out of Gilgit city, which was actually from the Mauryan era. So even today, those historical artifacts which actually indicate that this was and this has always been a part of Indian empires, right from Mauryan Empire till the Mughal Empire, it's been an integral part of India. That fact needs to be highlighted, because internationally there is a very, very serious concerted efforts by Pakistanis to show that Jammu and Kashmir itself is a separate issue. And even within Jammu and Kashmir, there has been an attempt to say that Gilgit-Baltistan was never a part of Jammu and Kashmir. It's actually a separate entity altogether. I think we need to counter that.
Yeah, that's an important point. Thank you, Alokji. Aditya ji, your last thoughts, please. I think we have just about 1 minute. So
I'll try to sum it up. Thank you, Priyanka. I think what we need to begin with is, of course, education and teaching the students in Kashmir in particular, because I say Kashmir because the trouble has been there, the mindset radicalization is there, and teach them the history of Kashmir. Teach them what is written in Kalhan's Rajtarangni. Teach them what's written in Nilmat Purana. Teach them what's written in Berestani Shahi and all these books, the rich history of Kashmir. Secondly, the politicians of Jammu and Kashmir, they need to not just realize, but the present dispensation in Delhi needs to convey to them that the kind of politics that they've been running over the years, be it self-determination, autonomy, or separatism, is not going to work anymore. I mean, they need to reinvent and redefine their politics. That's how they will survive. Otherwise, of course, they'll be relegated to the margins. Thirdly, radicalization, of course, has been talked in detail. That has to be a pointed concern. In Delhi, unfortunately, they do realize this, but not much efforts are being done to counter this. That needs to change. And lastly, messaging and communication is something that the government really needs to work on, not just in the context of Jammu and Kashmir, but overall on other issues as well. Thank you so much.
very well summed up. Thanks, Aditya. So with that being said, let me give it back to Satyendra ji. Thank you so much for joining our panel. I'd like to thank our esteemed guests for bearing with me, answering all my questions. It was really, really insightful for me as well. So thank you so much for being with me. And I really, really enjoyed this discussion. I hope our audience did as well. Thanks, Aditya, Alok ji, and Nidhi ji. Namaste to you all. And it was great interacting with you. Thank you so much. Satyendra ji, the floor is yours.
Yeah. आदित्य भाई, आलोक सर और निधि जी का इस सेशन में आने के लिए बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। जहां तक मैं खुद अपने आप में जो हिस्टोरिकल फैक्ट्स आलोक जी ने रखे और चाहे आदित्य भाई ने जो रखे, वो कंटेम्प्रेरी वर्ड्स में तो आदमी कश्मीर इश्यूज को समझता है, बट हिस्टोरिकल फैक्ट्स में बहुत कम नॉलेज है रेस्ट ऑफ इंडिया की अबाउट द कश्मीर. इट्स नॉट अबाउट कश्मीर. कश्मीर इन लार्ज मीन्स ऑक्युपाइड कश्मीर एंड द पार्ट ऑफ जम्मू एंड कश्मीर एंड लद्दाख. तो उसके बारे में बहुत ही कम लोगों को जानकारी है. और जो खजुराहो ने ये प्रयास किया कि सभी को जोड़ने का, कि रेस्ट ऑफ द वर्ल्ड और जो इंडिया है वो समझे कि कश्मीर एग्जैक्टली है क्या. तो आप दोनों का, तीनों का बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद. प्रियंका, लास्ट मोमेंट में मॉडरेट करने के लिए आपका भी बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद, बिकॉज जो पैनल को मॉडरेट कर रहे थे दे गॉट पॉजिटिव. सो कोविड पैंडेमिक में आप सभी ने समय निकाला और आप जुड़े, आप सभी का धन्यवाद. और होप करता हूँ कि आगे वाले समय में खजुराहो लिटरेचर फेस्टिवल एक बार फिर से फिजिकली आप लोगों को होस्ट कर पाए, और खजुराहो में एक साथ बैठेंगे और डिस्कस करेंगे और भी कश्मीर के बारे में एक्सप्लोर करेंगे और जानेंगे कि कश्मीर को और कश्मीरीज को. आप सभी का धन्यवाद.